Reba McEntire has carried a question for more than 3 decades. A quiet, relentless question that does not fade with time or success. It is the kind of question that surfaces in the stillness of the night, when the noise of applause is gone and memory becomes louder than any crowd. Was it worth it? Was everything she gained worth what it cost her to keep going? For most people, a single tragedy of overwhelming magnitude would be enough to step away from the spotlight forever. For Reba, tragedy did not arrive once. It arrived in chapters, each one testing her will to continue. The moment that changed everything came in March of 1991. A touring schedule, a tired voice, and a simple decision to rest because of bronchitis kept her off a small plane heading to the next show. She was supposed to be on that flight. Instead, 8 members of her band and crew boarded without her. Minutes after takeoff, the aircraft struck a mountainside and exploded on impact. There were small fires still burning when rescuers arrived. Even after dawn, the wreckage smoldered. 8 lives were gone in an instant. Friends, family on the road, people who had shared her journey night after night. Surviving did not feel like a blessing. It felt like a burden she did not know how to carry. The guilt settled in quickly, heavy and persistent. Why them and not her? What was she supposed to do with a life spared by something as random as a head cold? In the days that followed, Reba withdrew from the world. The thought of standing on a stage without the people who had stood beside her felt unbearable. Music, once her refuge, suddenly felt like a reminder of loss. Continuing felt wrong, almost disrespectful, as if moving forward meant leaving them behind. But this was not the first time Reba had questioned whether she could keep going. Long before the crash, she had already learned how fragile dreams could be. Raised on a ranch in Oklahoma, she grew up in a world where hard work was expected and ambition was often seen as impractical. Her mother had dreamed of being a singer herself, a dream she was never allowed to pursue. Instead, she poured that hope into her children, teaching them to sing in the car, entering them in local talent shows, believing fiercely in the power of music even when life had denied her the chance to live it fully. Reba carried that inheritance with her into adulthood, into an industry that did not immediately know what to do with her voice or her fire. She struggled for years before success arrived. And when it did, it brought complications of its own, including a marriage that slowly turned controlling and resentful, making her feel small for wanting more. By the time the plane crash shattered her world, Reba was no stranger to pain. Yet standing at that crossroads in 1991, she came closer than ever to walking away from everything she had built. What stopped her was not strength alone. It was the voices of people who loved her, who reminded her that the music was bigger than the pain, and that the life she had been spared still had meaning. This is where her story truly begins, not with fame, but with the moments she almost let it all end. Long before the world called her the Queen of Country, Reba McEntire was simply a ranch girl growing up in rural Oklahoma, shaped by dust, discipline, and the unspoken understanding that dreams were luxuries few could afford. She was born into a family where responsibility came before desire, where the day began before sunrise and ended only when the work was done. Her father, a celebrated steer roper, believed deeply in endurance and self-reliance. In his world, you did not complain, and you certainly did not quit. That mindset became part of Reba long before she ever stepped onto a stage. Her mother, Jacqueline, carried a quieter story. She had once dreamed of becoming a singer, of standing under bright lights and letting her voice fill a room. But life in mid-century Oklahoma did not leave much space for those ambitions, especially for women. Marriage, children, and the demands of ranch life replaced the future she imagined. Yet she never let go of music. Instead, she passed it on. On long drives across endless highways, Jacqueline taught her children how to harmonize, how to listen to one another, how to blend voices into something larger than themselves. Music became both a gift and a responsibility, a dream deferred but not abandoned. From an early age, it was clear that Reba had something rare. Her voice carried power without force, emotion without exaggeration. People noticed. Talent shows turned into local performances, and local performances slowly built a reputation. By her late teens, she could command a room with nothing more than a microphone and a song. When she sang the national anthem at a major rodeo event, it changed the direction of her life. A chance encounter led to an opportunity to pursue a recording career, and with it came a decision that would define her future. Leave home and chase the dream her mother never could. Nashville was not kind at first. The industry did not know where to place her. Her early recordings failed to make an impact, and for years she played to small crowds, earning little money and questioning whether the sacrifices were worth it. Success did not arrive quickly, and doubt became a familiar companion. Still, she kept going, driven not only by ambition but by the weight of expectation, the sense that she was carrying more than her own hopes. During those early years, Reba married a rodeo champion who seemed, at first, to understand her world. He came from the same culture, spoke the same language of ranch life and hard work. But as her career slowly began to rise, something shifted. Her success became a source of tension rather than pride. What should have been shared victories turned into quiet resentments. Control replaced support. Encouragement gave way to criticism. Reba found herself shrinking inside a life that no longer fit, trying to balance loyalty with survival. Leaving that marriage took courage she did not yet know she had. Walking away meant starting over, emotionally and professionally. It meant choosing herself in a way she had never been taught to do. That decision, painful as it was, laid the foundation for the strength she would need later, when life tested her in ways no one could have prepared for. By the late 1980s, her career finally caught fire. Hits climbed the charts. Audiences grew larger. The long years of struggle seemed to find their justification. She built a touring band that felt like family, people she trusted completely, people who shared the road, the laughter, the exhaustion, and the joy of watching a dream finally take shape. For the first time, her life felt balanced. She had escaped a suffocating past and stepped into a future that felt earned. That sense of stability made what came next even more devastating. The plane crash did not just take colleagues. It took the people who represented safety, routine, and belonging in a life defined by constant movement. It shattered the fragile peace she had fought so hard to build. When Reba stood at the edge of quitting after 1991, it was not because she lacked resilience. It was because she had already used so much of it just to get there. Understanding that history is essential to understanding why she nearly walked away. It landed on top of years of struggle, sacrifice, and emotional fatigue. And yet, even then, her story did not end in silence. It paused, waiting for the voices that would remind her who she was before the pain and why her voice still mattered. The days following the plane crash in March of 1991 unfolded in a blur that Reba McEntire would later struggle to fully describe. Shock has a way of distorting time, stretching minutes into hours and collapsing entire days into fragments of memory. What she remembered most clearly was the silence. The phone stopped ringing. The rehearsal rooms stood empty. The familiar rhythm of touring life, once relentless and exhausting, vanished overnight, leaving behind a stillness that felt unnatural and cruel. These were not just people she had lost. They were the constants in a life defined by motion. Her tour manager, her band leader, her musicians, her backup singer, the pilots who had safely carried them through countless nights in the air. They were the ones who shared her victories and steadied her during disappointments. They ate together, laughed together, argued, reconciled, and trusted one another with their lives in a way few outside that world truly understand. When the plane struck the mountainside, it was not only a group of professionals who died. It was the family she had built to replace the one she rarely saw while living on the road. The guilt came quietly at first, then all at once. It did not shout. It whispered. It asked questions without answers. Why did she stay behind? Why did a head cold decide who lived and who did not? She replayed the choice endlessly, knowing it was irrational, knowing she could not have changed the outcome, and still feeling responsible. Survivor's guilt does not obey logic. It feeds on imagination, on alternate realities that never existed but feel real enough to punish you for them. Reba withdrew because the world felt wrong without them in it. Standing on a stage felt impossible. The applause sounded hollow in her mind, stripped of the shared glances and inside jokes that once gave it meaning. She canceled performances not out of obligation, but out of instinct. Grief demanded isolation. She did not want to explain herself. She did not want to be strong in public. She wanted time to sit with the pain and decide whether moving forward was even allowed. In those weeks, she questioned everything she had built. Music had been the constant through every chapter of her life, from childhood car rides with her mother to the lonely nights in half-empty clubs to the moment success finally arrived. Now music felt like the source of her loss. Without touring, the plane would not have flown. Without the career, the band would not have existed. That line of thinking is dangerous, but grief rarely chooses safe paths. It pushes you toward extremes, toward absolutes, toward the belief that the only way to honor the dead is to stop living the life that included them. What changed her direction was not time alone. It was people. One voice, in particular, cut through the fog with brutal clarity. Debbie Hammond, the widow of her tour manager, reached out to Reba with words that were not gentle, but necessary. She told her that if her husband had known Reba was considering quitting, he would have been furious. That the last thing any of them would have wanted was for their deaths to silence the music they loved. Coming from a woman who had lost her husband, the message carried weight no comfort speech ever could. It reframed grief from something that demanded retreat into something that demanded courage. That moment marked the first crack in the wall Reba had built around herself. Soon after, another lifeline appeared. Dolly Parton, a friend whose bond with Reba went back decades, made an offer that stunned her. Dolly offered her band, her buses, her team, anything Reba needed to get back on the road. There were no conditions, no expectations. It was not a business move. It was an act of solidarity, one artist reaching for another in her darkest hour. The gesture reminded Reba that the industry she often described as ruthless also contained rare, profound kindness. Support came from unexpected places as well. Kenny Rogers offered her a role in a television film, giving her something to focus on besides the relentless replay of loss. Work became a form of survival, not as distraction, but as structure. Slowly, painfully, she began to re-enter the world she had nearly abandoned. When she returned to music, she did not pretend everything was fine. Instead, she poured her grief directly into it. The album that emerged from that period was not designed to chase trends or chart positions. It was an honest expression of heartbreak, survivor's guilt, and fragile resilience. The result surprised everyone, including Reba herself. The album resonated with millions of listeners who heard their own losses reflected in her voice. It became the most successful release of her career, a testament to the strange way pain, when expressed truthfully, can create connection rather than isolation. Yet success did not erase the scars. It simply proved she could function alongside them. For years afterward, the memory of that night remained close. She honored the lives lost not by forgetting them, but by carrying them with her, allowing their absence to inform her work rather than end it. Each performance became both tribute and continuation, a quiet acknowledgement that she was still here because others had insisted she should be. This period marked a turning point, but not a resolution. The crash taught Reba that survival is not a single decision. It is a series of choices made daily, often against your own instincts. It showed her that strength does not always look like confidence or certainty. Sometimes it looks like standing on a stage with a broken heart and singing anyway, because someone once told you the music mattered too much to stop. By the time she found her footing again, Reba McEntire was no longer just a survivor of tragedy. She was a woman who understood, in a way few do, how quickly everything can vanish and how deliberate the act of continuing must be. The plane crash did not end her career, but it permanently altered her relationship with it. From that point on, success would never again be measured only in numbers or accolades. It would be measured in moments of choosing to move forward when it would have been easier to disappear. After the shock of 1991 began to settle into something resembling routine, Reba McEntire entered a chapter of her life that, from the outside, looked like stability. She rebuilt her touring operation, returned to recording, and found renewed confidence in her ability to transform pain into purpose. Audiences responded to the honesty in her voice, critics praised her resilience, and the industry once again held her up as a model of endurance. Yet beneath the surface, the balance she appeared to have found rested on fragile ground, and it would be tested again in ways that cut even deeper than the crash. In the years following the tragedy, Reba leaned heavily on a partnership that seemed to offer both emotional and professional security. Her marriage to Narvel Blackstock was built not only on affection, but on shared ambition. He managed her career while also being her husband, creating a life where business decisions and personal trust were intertwined. For a long time, it worked. Together, they navigated albums, tours, television projects, and the careful expansion of her public image. They raised a son. They built an empire that appeared unshakable. During this period, Reba's career expanded beyond music. She stepped into acting, most notably through her own television series, which introduced her to audiences who had never listened to country music. The show was successful, running for years and further cementing her status as a cultural figure rather than simply a singer. She became a brand, a familiar face whose presence felt reassuring, steady, dependable. To many, she embodied the idea that perseverance always pays off in the end. But endurance has a cost, and over time, the lines between marriage and management began to blur in ways that quietly eroded her sense of security. Trust, once assumed, became something she had to actively maintain. Decisions that affected her future were no longer purely artistic or personal. They were contractual, financial, and complex. Still, she believed in the partnership. She believed in the life they had built. And because she had already survived so much, she trusted that this foundation would hold. When the marriage ended in 2015, the ground gave way without warning. The divorce was not her decision. It arrived abruptly, dismantling not only a relationship, but an entire structure she had relied on for more than 2 decades. The separation forced her to untangle years of shared business arrangements while simultaneously processing the emotional shock of being left by someone she had trusted completely. It was a rupture that reopened old wounds, echoing earlier moments when she had been forced to start over against her will. The financial settlement only intensified the sense of betrayal. Money, which had never been her primary motivation, suddenly became symbolic of loss, of effort redirected away from her control. More painful than the numbers was the realization that the partnership she believed in had ended without her consent. Once again, she found herself standing alone, older now, more tired, carrying the accumulated weight of decades spent proving she could survive anything. Emotionally, this period mirrored the aftermath of the plane crash in ways that frightened her. The familiar thoughts returned. What was the point of continuing? How many times could she rebuild before there was nothing left to restore? The stage, once again, felt distant. The applause no longer filled the spaces left by absence. And yet, she kept moving, not because she felt strong, but because stopping felt like surrender. Then came the loss that cut closest to the origin of everything she was. In 2020, her mother, Jacqueline McEntire, passed away after a battle with cancer. She was 93 years old. To the public, it was another chapter in a life marked by grief. To Reba, it was the removal of the central pillar that had supported her since childhood. Her mother was not only her first teacher, but the reason she sang at all. Jacqueline had given up her own dream so that her daughter could pursue it. Every performance, every milestone had been, in some quiet way, for her. Without that presence, music felt empty again. The songs lost their anchor. The stages lost their meaning. For the second time in her life, Reba stood at the edge of walking away from everything she had built. This time, the pull towards silence was stronger because grief had accumulated. She was no longer young. Recovery did not feel inevitable. It felt exhausting. What kept her from stepping back was not the promise of success or relevance. It was memory. Her sister reminded her that their mother would never have wanted her to stop, that the gift Jacqueline had nurtured was meant to be shared, not buried with sorrow. It was a reminder that quitting would not honor the sacrifices that had shaped her life. Continuing, even when it hurt, was the truest form of gratitude. During this period of uncertainty, something unexpected began to take shape. An old acquaintance, someone she had met decades earlier during another moment of rebuilding, re-entered her life. Rex Lynn had first crossed paths with Reba in the early 1990s, when she was finding her footing after the crash. Over the years, they had remained loosely connected, their lives moving in parallel, but never intersecting at the right time. Now, both older, both changed by loss, they found themselves talking again. What began as casual conversation grew into something deeper. There was no urgency, no illusion, just companionship built on understanding rather than expectation. For Reba, this connection felt different from what she had known before. It was not rooted in control or shared ambition. It was rooted in acceptance. Someone who did not compete with her success or manage her life, but simply stood beside it. This emerging relationship did not erase her grief or undo her past. What it did was offer proof that new chapters were still possible, even after everything she had endured. It suggested that the reason she had survived, again and again, was not to remain strong forever, but to remain open to what might come next. Part 4 of Reba McEntire's story is not about triumph in the traditional sense. It is about endurance without certainty, about choosing to remain visible when invisibility feels safer. It is about understanding that resilience is not a straight line forward, but a series of returns, each one harder than the last, each one requiring faith that something meaningful still waits ahead. As the world slowed to a standstill in 2020, Reba McEntire found herself confronting a kind of silence she had never known before. Touring stopped. Stages went dark. The routines that had structured her life for decades disappeared almost overnight. For many artists, the pause was unsettling. For Reba, it was dangerous. Without the momentum of work, grief had space to expand. The loss of her mother was still raw, and now there were no distractions, no packed schedules to outrun the ache. The quiet forced her to sit with questions she had been avoiding. Who was she without the applause? What did music mean when the person she had always sung for was gone? During those early months of isolation, she felt herself drifting closer to a decision she had narrowly avoided twice before. Walking away no longer felt dramatic or defiant. It felt practical. She had nothing left to prove. She had survived tragedy, heartbreak, public success, private collapse. Perhaps the bravest thing now was to stop. The idea frightened her not because she feared irrelevance, but because she feared emptiness. Music had always been her language for processing life. Without it, she did not know how she would speak to the world or to herself. It was during this fragile period that an unexpected connection began to deepen. Conversations that started casually became something to look forward to. There was comfort in talking to someone who knew her history without being defined by it, who did not see her as an icon or a problem to solve. The timing mattered. After decades of relationships that had asked her to compromise, manage, or explain herself, this connection required none of that. It was simple, grounded, unforced. What surprised Reba most was not the romance itself, but how safe it felt. For the first time in her adult life, she was with someone who did not see her career as competition or responsibility. Her success was not something to control or benefit from. It was simply part of who she was. That difference mattered more than grand gestures ever could. It allowed her to exhale in a way she did not realize she had been holding in for years. This sense of ease did not erase her grief. There were still days when the weight of loss pressed heavily on her chest, when memories of her mother surfaced unexpectedly, triggered by a song, a phrase, a quiet moment. But the presence of someone willing to sit with her through that pain, without trying to fix it or rush her through it, changed how she carried it. Grief stopped being something she faced alone. Slowly, the idea of returning to music stopped feeling like an obligation and started feeling like a choice again. Not because the world demanded it, but because she wanted it. She began to sing not for legacy or expectation, but for connection. In small moments, she felt the familiar pull, the reminder that music was still the most honest way she knew to express what words could not. As live performances gradually returned, Reba stepped back onto the stage with a different posture than before. She was no longer trying to outrun loss or prove resilience. She sang with the awareness that every performance was temporary, every audience fleeting, every moment fragile. That awareness did not weaken her voice. It deepened it. Listeners could hear the difference. There was less polish, more truth. Less distance, more intimacy. The decision to continue was not framed as a comeback. Reba did not need redemption. What she found instead was renewal. A quieter, steadier form of purpose that had nothing to do with charts or numbers. She was singing because it still mattered to her, because it still connected her to the people she had lost and the people still listening. When she said yes to a future she had not planned, it was not an impulsive leap. It was the result of years spent learning what she could survive and what she could still hope for. The engagement that followed was not about rewriting her past. It was about acknowledging that her past did not get to decide her ending. Reba McEntire had spent much of her life enduring hardship, enduring expectations, enduring grief. In this chapter, she learned something new. She learned how to receive, to accept love without conditions, to accept joy without suspicion, to accept that happiness did not always have to be earned through pain. Part 5 of her story is not loud or dramatic. It does not hinge on tragedy or spectacle. It is defined by something far rarer. Peace, not the absence of sorrow, but the presence of balance. The understanding that she could carry her losses and still move forward, not because she was strong enough to withstand more pain, but because she was finally allowing herself to live for something beyond survival. At an age when many assume the story is finished, Reba discovered that fulfillment does not follow a schedule. It arrives when you are willing to remain open, even after life has given you every reason to close yourself off. She did not choose to keep going because she feared stopping. She chose to keep going because she had found something worth continuing for. By the time Reba McEntire entered her late 60s, she had learned that survival and fulfillment were not the same thing. For most of her life, continuing meant enduring. It meant standing back up because stopping felt like failure, because too many people were watching, because too many sacrifices had already been made. But now, as she moved forward with a steadier heart and a quieter sense of purpose, something fundamental had shifted. She was no longer moving out of obligation. She was moving out of clarity. Looking back, Reba could see how close she had come, more than once, to letting everything end. After the plane crash, the temptation to disappear had been rooted in guilt. After the collapse of her marriage and the death of her mother, it had been rooted in exhaustion. Each time, the urge to stop was not about weakness. It was about reaching a limit that few people ever have to face so publicly. What changed was not the pain itself, but her relationship to it. For the first time, she allowed herself to acknowledge how tired she was. Not physically, but emotionally. Tired of proving resilience. Tired of being an example. Tired of carrying expectations that were never hers to begin with. Admitting that exhaustion did not make her smaller. It made her honest. And that honesty became the foundation of this next chapter. Returning to the stage after everything she had lost felt different now. She was not chasing relevance or validation. She was present. Every performance carried an awareness that had been missing before. She noticed the faces in the audience more clearly. She listened to the silence between songs. She felt gratitude not as a performance, but as something deeply internal. The music no longer served as armor. It became a conversation. Audiences sensed the change. They did not come just to hear the hits they remembered. They came to witness a woman who had lived through what many fear most and was still willing to stand in front of them, open and unguarded. Reba was no longer singing from a place of aspiration. She was singing from experience. That difference carried weight. In interviews, she spoke less about success and more about meaning. She no longer framed her life as a series of victories over adversity. Instead, she described it as a long negotiation with loss, faith, and choice. She acknowledged that there were moments when continuing felt impossible, and that the only reason she did was because someone else believed she should. Those admissions did not diminish her legacy. They strengthened it. They made her human in a way icons rarely allow themselves to be. What Reba came to understand was that wanting to stop does not mean you're meant to fail. Sometimes it means you have reached a point where the old reasons for continuing no longer apply. The challenge is finding new ones. For her, those reasons were no longer tied to ambition or expectation. They were tied to connection, to love that did not demand anything in return, to music that felt honest again, to the quiet understanding that she did not have to outrun grief to keep living alongside it. She also learned that healing does not erase the past. The plane crash never stopped hurting. The divorce never stopped disappointing. The absence of her mother never stopped aching. But those experiences no longer define the boundaries of her future. They became part of a larger story, one that included joy, laughter, and the possibility of peace. As she looked ahead, Reba did not talk about final chapters or retirement. She talked about gratitude, about waking up without dread, about choosing projects that felt right instead of necessary, about loving without fear of loss controlling her decisions. These were quiet victories, invisible to the outside world, but monumental to her. Part 6 of Reba McEntire's story is not about resurgence or reinvention. It is about release. Releasing the need to justify her survival. Releasing the belief that strength requires constant sacrifice. Releasing the idea that stopping and failing are the same thing. She did not keep going because she was afraid to end. She kept going because she had finally learned how to live without needing to prove that she deserved to. In that understanding, she found something she had been chasing without realizing it for most of her life. Not success, not recognition, but peace. At 70 years old, Reba McEntire stands in a place few people ever reach, not because of fame or longevity, but because of perspective. When she looks back now, she does not see a straight line of triumphs and setbacks. She sees a life shaped by moments when everything could have ended, and by choices made in the quiet aftermath of those moments. Her story is not about refusing to fall. It is about falling more than once and deciding that the fall would not be the final word. She lost 8 people she loved in a single night and carried the weight of surviving them for the rest of her life. She endured a marriage that slowly diminished her, then rebuilt herself from the ground up. She believed she had found lasting security, only to have it taken away decades later without her consent. And she lost the one person who had given her music its deepest meaning, the mother whose abandoned dream had become the foundation of her own. Any one of those losses could have justified walking away. Taken together, they nearly did. What makes Reba's journey remarkable is not that she never wanted to quit. It is that she admitted she did. She stood at the edge more than once and acknowledged the temptation to let everything go quiet. That honesty matters because it reframes strength. Strength, in her story, is not constant confidence or unbreakable resolve. It is the willingness to keep moving forward even when the reason is unclear, even when the heart is heavy, even when continuing feels harder than stopping. In the end, she did not find her way back because of charts, awards, or public expectation. She found her way back because people who loved her refused to let her disappear, because someone reminded her that her voice mattered beyond her own pain. because she learned that honoring loss does not require silence. Sometimes it requires presence. Today, when Reba steps onto a stage, she does so without illusion. She understands how fragile everything is. She understands that joy and grief are not opposites, but companions that often walk side by side. Her voice carries not just talent, but lived experience, and that is what audiences respond to now. They're not just hearing songs. They are hearing survival translated into sound. Her later life is not defined by reinvention or comeback narratives. It is defined by acceptance. Acceptance that the worst chapters did not disqualify her from happiness. Acceptance that love can arrive late and still be real. Acceptance that purpose does not expire with age or loss. She continues not because she is chasing something ahead, but because she has made peace with what is behind her. Reba McEntire's story ultimately reminds us that wanting to end does not mean your story should. That the moments when you feel most ready to give up may be the moments just before something meaningful appears. She is living proof that the best chapters are not always the loudest or the most celebrated. Sometimes they're the quiet ones, written after the storm has passed, when you finally realize that surviving was never the point. Living was.